remember ever seeing Muji's wall-mounted CD player? It was a playfully designed novelty, came out in '99. The look was intended to mimic a kitchen extractor fan with the dangling power lead doubling as the pull power switch. Even if you're unfamiliar with the original, it's quite likely you've spotted one of the myriad of clones and takes on this idea that have appeared over the years. There's even an Amazon Basics version, and it was this one that I bought last November when it was briefly reduced to a ridiculously low price of £11.75. Now, I really bought it first just to talk about how you can get a fully functioning CD player for under £12, but also to address how there were always a few issues with this design that grated on me. That's whether it's the original Muji version or any of the copies, but I also wondered whether those flaws could be overlooked when you consider the low price. However, after that price then shot back up again, much of the point in making that video evaporated, so I just put everything to one side. But then just the other week I spotted another take on the wall-mounted CD player by a Japanese company, and it was as if they had read my mind, because everything I didn't like about that original design seems to have been addressed in their version. So in this video we're going to be taking a look at both this newer Japanese one and the other designs. We'll look at pros and cons. Of course, they're all made in China, I understand that, but we'll start off with the cheaper one. If you want to skip to the more recent one, well, there'll be chapters provided on the video. Okay, so getting everything out of the box for the first time, looking at the top of the player, we've got buttons for mode, volume and track skip, along with a digital display panel, and on the bottom there's sockets to accommodate a USB memory stick or a micro SD card for playing back MP3s and WMAs, and there's also a 3.5mm audio mini jack input and that fixed USB lead that supplies the power and doubles as a pull switch to turn the device on and off, and playback also starts whenever the power is switched on. Now, I have a feeling that the reason the one I bought was so heavily discounted might have been to dump stock, as despite buying this in the UK, it came with a Euro plug USB power supply. Perhaps a container of these had ended up in the wrong place. Oh, we've also got a 3.5mm jack lead and a remote control, so quite a lot of stuff really for the money. Now, a desk stand is also included as an option, but the real home for this is on the wall, with a wall bracket which is also included, and the mounting hardware is provided for that purpose. Now, I was confused about what looked like 3 gramophone needles in the screw packet, but it turns out these are mounting pins for attaching the bracket to wood. The device does seem to be based around old internals, as the manual advises only to use USB and micro SD cards up to 16GB in capacity. Now, that's of no concern to me, as I'm not interested in using this as anything other than a CD player. According to the specs, the inbuilt stereo speakers output 2 times 3 watts. I thought we should just have a look inside the case to see how things are laid out in there, and I was pleasantly surprised about how well it's put together. They'd even gone to the trouble of putting a sponge seal around the back of it, presumably to prevent rattling. It showed a surprising attention to detail, and while I bought mine at a ridiculous discount, the regular price of this before that was only somewhere around about £30 odd, so it's still pretty impressive that they could assemble, ship and sell these at a worthwhile profit at such a low price. Anyway, enough about what it looks like on the inside. What does it sound like when it's all put back together? Now, turning a CD player on with a pull cord makes very little ergonomic sense when it's sat on a desk, but that's what you have to do, so let's give it a go. It really does not go very loud at all. In fact, I wasn't sure the volume control was working properly at first, but it turns out it was just maxed out. The tone of the sound reminds me of the cheap off-brand handheld transistor radios I bought as a child, and having a display on the top might keep the front looking tidy, but it's really not the most convenient location for reading it. One positive, though, is that it's impossible to turn the volume up high enough to overload those speakers and distort the sound. I mean, there's no point in it going any louder if it's going to be unlistenable. And of course, having 2 speakers this close together doesn't really provide any impression of a stereo soundstage. Now, when it's hanging on a wall as nature intended, that dangling power cable really does look ugly to me. This was one of the issues I've always had with this whole range of devices. I'm just not a fan of wires hanging down like that. Some people don't notice them, but I'm not one of them. In a similar way that some people are fine having their TVs mounted very high up in a room and it just gets on my nerves. And another issue that isn't a fault of these devices at all is the fact that most of my CD collection, especially the older ones, just aren't worth looking at. The discs aren't decorative. They're silver discs with text text printed on them. They were never intended to be hung on a wall as an art piece. Now, this was something that Bang & Olufsen realised with their BeoSound 9000 CD player, and as a result, they sold sets of 6 colourful CD picture discs that you could leave installed on your player for aesthetic reasons. So to sum up, the first player and similar devices, of which there are many, the things I don't like about them are the dangling power cable, the fact the sound is rubbish, I suspect that's very similar for most of them as well, and most compact discs just aren't really worth putting on the wall as art. And this is where the second device comes in, because it resolves all of these issues. Now, compared to the other one, it's a much more expensive device. I think they're trying to be a bit arty and exclusive, but in reality, I'm quite sure the internals of this are very similar. There can't be too many factories knocking out those cheap CD player mechanisms. But all that said, the way they put everything together here makes this a much more appealing prospect. Right, first off, there's no attached USB cable. Instead, it uses a built-in battery, which is charged via USB-C. The controls on the top are track forward and back, play, pause, stop, volume, and a Bluetooth button. Yeah, there's no built-in speakers here. Also, more sensibly, there's a basic display on the front behind the door. Now, considering that this device is only sold in Japan, the instructions are therefore only in Japanese, but a quick translation of the specs reveals it has a 7-hour battery life, it uses Bluetooth 5 via the BT966 chipset, and it will support playback of MP3s from CDs. However, I'm just going to use this as a normal CD player. So the first job is to set my usual Bluetooth speakers into their pairing mode, and then holding down the Bluetooth button on the CD player itself connects it up straight away, with no fuss and no drama.
Let's turn on the night, we can rendezvous.
Now, on the back of the device, there is a switch to choose between 3 different play modes, as well as a hold switch. But perhaps the simplest and yet most important feature of this device is its ability to hold the CD booklet in that front window, which then gives you the option to look at the album cover rather than the CD.
I reminisce for a spell, or shall I say think back 22 years ago to keep...
Now, with this one, the wall mount is an option. When I bought this on Amazon Japan, it enabled me to add both things together as a bundle. I'm glad it flagged the wall mount up, otherwise I might have missed it. It's a metal bracket which screws to the back of the player, which then lets you hang it off a couple of screws that are mounted in the wall. When I think about a CD or an album, I don't think about the disc itself, it's the cover, the album art, and this player allows me to display that whilst also having sound coming out of a decent speaker system located in a more appropriate part of the room, and it also does away with the messy cabling of the other devices. Now, it's obvious that this is just using the same internals that you'd also find in a CD portable, but put inside this custom case. As a result, you get a 3.5mm headphone socket, so in theory, you could use it as a personal stereo, but given its design, it's far from suited for that role. Although, because of its origins, it does have an effective shock protection buffer. And I should mention, unlike the other device, this one doesn't need a stand if you want to put it on a desk or a shelf, and it looks particularly neat there alongside a load of other CDs. But for some reason, to me, the idea of having a playable version of your favourite album mounted on the wall is something that I find oddly appealing. To buy mine from Japan via Amazon, including the optional mount and shipping to the UK, cost me a total of £131.69. You'll have to do your own calculations for wherever you are because the shipping will be different. But I've got to say, it is a lot more expensive than the other device, even when that's at its regular price. And of course, it's not perfect either. Swapping in a booklet from a CD jewel case is relatively easy with the player on a tabletop, but it can get really quite fiddly when it's mounted on the wall and gravity is against you. I feel that they could have come up with a much easier slide-in system. But all things considered, I much prefer the way that this device has approached the idea of a wall-mounted CD player compared to the Muji player and all of its clones. It's almost like someone has thought about it for a minute. Now, if you're one of the handful of viewers watching this who think that this could be useful to them, I'll provide Amazon Japan links in the video description, and those links will not be affiliated. But if you fall within the vast majority of people who've just watched this video and thought, well, that's a silly product, why would I want one of those? I think the best option would be not to buy one. Anyway, that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.